Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Wow, what an amazing few sessions we've had. The last one, particularly how inspiring all the speakers have been. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and those who are still with us. A very warm welcome to this next session, section 5 of today, which is on the core skills that people need to develop to establish a career in human rights practice and advocacy. We are very lucky to have 4 brilliant speakers with us today, who will hopefully be sharing their words of wisdom and tips with everyone today. My name is Shoaib Khan, as Ismini said. I'm Vice Chair of the Human Rights Lawyers Association. A solicitor is what I do in my day job, and I'm also a member of the Law Society's Human Rights Committee. This session will essentially be looking at covering any strategies, any tips, any techniques that our panel can suggest for people looking to secure internships, voluntary work, or generally any sort of entry point positions in the field of human rights. So that could cover NGOs, courts, law practices, obviously chambers, firms, and so on, and generally how we can just get that first foot in the door, really. So hopefully what we will be aiming to cover is the requirements of these human rights organizations, what skills, qualities they need, what they're looking for in candidates, and how students and early career practitioners can build those skills and the competencies required to work in this area. So I will very quickly just give the names of our speakers, and then they can just take a minute or so each to introduce themselves. Our first speaker today is Michael Harwood, who is a barrister at 4-5 Gray's Inn Square, and he is chair of the Bar Council's Young Barristers Association. So Michael, if you would like to say a few words.
Thank you, Shoaib, and thank you everybody for having me on this panel this afternoon. Yes, as you've just heard, I'm a barrister at 4-5 Gray's Inn Square. My practice is mostly in public law, judicial review of all kinds. But prior to joining the self-employed bar, I worked as a lawyer in the civil service for a number of years, which encompassed all number of things, but certainly quite a lot of it was the policy and legal aspects related to human rights as well. So hopefully I'll get an opportunity to touch on that.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Michael. If we could then go to Helena Samaha, who is President and CEO of Lex Mundi.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Yes, as Shoaib has said, I'm the CEO of Lex Mundi. Lex Mundi is a network or association, if you like, of about 160 law firms in 125 countries. They are what we call our members, and my organization provides them with a range of services to include training their lawyers, market intelligence research, thought leadership, and professional development. Big caveat, I'm actually not a human rights lawyer, but when I was asked to do this panel, I was really delighted because when I started in university studying law, I was in France at the time. The reason I wanted to become a lawyer is because I was on a mission to join UNICEF and work in the space of the protection of children and their rights. So this program really speaks to me, and I'll talk to you a little bit about the work that we do and how some of the areas that we cover does bring you back, that has a lot of touch points with human rights law as well.
Thank you so much, Helena. Next, if we could go to Chris. So Chris Esdaile, who is legal advisor at REDRESS.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much for having me on the panel. So I'm a legal advisor at REDRESS. REDRESS is a small charity based in London. We work on reparations for torture. So we have about 30 staff in London and The Hague, mostly lawyers. And about 50% of my work is casework, where we directly represent survivors of torture in litigation before regional human rights mechanisms and UN treaty bodies. And 50% of my work is kind of project work on different projects, which we may get into. And my route here is maybe a bit different from some of the others. I started off with a law degree. I then continued with my training. I did a training contract, became a solicitor, Worked for 10 years in legal aid work in Birmingham in a large legal aid practice, doing housing litigation on behalf of tenants. I then spent 5 years working in northern Chile in South America in a centre working with women suffering domestic abuse. After I came back, I did a master's in international human rights at Queen Mary, University of London, and a short internship followed that. And then I worked at Lee Day for 6 years as an associate solicitor doing corporate accountability work and some of their work on the Iraq war litigation. So quite a kind of a broad range of things, but all of which was tied together with this idea of trying to make that system a bit more accessible for people. So that's the kind of thread that runs through it, I think, but we can talk a bit more about that. Thanks, Shoaib.
Thank you, Chris. And then finally, our final panelist, Ben Leather, who is Director of Peace Brigades International.
Hi, everyone. It's good to be here. Yeah, so I'm the Director of the UK office of an international NGO called PBI, or Peace Brigades International. I started the role as Director last year, but it was actually PBI that 15 years ago changed my career and probably changed my life when I signed up to be a volunteer for PBI out in their team in Mexico. PBI is predominantly a volunteer-based organisation, and at the heart of our model is that we send teams of trained volunteers who spend a year in one of our frontline teams providing what we call protective accompaniment to human rights defenders who are facing threats and reprisals because of their work. And our volunteers work alongside and with those human rights defenders day to day to try and work out how they can keep those people safe and make their work help them have an impact with their work. And I learned an incredible amount during that year as a volunteer. I'm not the only one. I think there's hundreds of ex-PBI volunteers who are now working at the UN or in NGOs or as human rights lawyers. And I often say it's the best human rights school in the world. So one of the points I'll be making today is about the importance of getting a breadth of experience and expertise and valuing volunteering as a way to do that now and throughout your career with PBI or elsewhere, and legal and otherwise, but especially alongside those human rights defenders who are on the front lines of some of these issues.
Thank you so much, Ben. So right on to our first question then, I guess, the main question that we're here to discuss today. So I guess I'll probably take the speakers in the same order that we just went through the introductions. So what are the core skills and qualities that you think human rights organizations typically seek in candidates? So Michael.
Thanks, Shoaib. I mean, part of the answer will depend on the particular organization, firm or so on that you are thinking about applying to, because the thing with human rights as a practice, certainly as a legal practice, is it straddles so many other different sort of areas that you could work in. And so I think it's really important to, first of all, to demonstrate that you have an understanding or appreciation of that. But next, it's really a lot about depending on the kind of role that you're looking to. I mean, for someone who wants to practice this, doing what I do at the bar, I mean, legal analysis and research skills are obviously hugely important for the reasons that I've just mentioned. The breadth of this as a practice area is obviously huge, and you need to have an appreciation about how it applies and where it applies and where you find the information that you need. But also, I know there's potentially later on we're going to come on to what are called soft skills. That's not a term I necessarily particularly like, but it is a sort of handy way of referring to the really important skills that certainly human rights lawyers need about how we deal with other people, which is a huge part of what lawyers, barristers, or solicitors do, whether that's in a sort of leadership role, working with others, or just communicating what are often, and particularly in human rights law is certainly the case, very complex legal ideas and principles. Our role as lawyers is to act as that bridge between what can be a really difficult and complex area, and distill it into a way that that people can understand, particularly whether it's our lay clients, but also those that we're trying to persuade. So I think we're going to deal with soft skills later, but those are obviously absolutely essential. But certainly in the legal context, being able to identify the law, where it applies, that sort of thing is hugely important in human rights, as it is, of course, in other areas as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Michael. Helena.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I would like to pick up on the thread that Michael ran through his commentary about sort of commonality of skills across various areas of practice. As I mentioned earlier, I'm not a human rights lawyer, but I have worked extensively around the world. I'm both a UK and French qualified lawyer, and I'm now running an organization where I have to deal with people in 125 countries. And I think that there are some pretty core skills that we all need in our work. I would say resilience, honestly, is one that has certainly helped me on a day-to-day basis. And the other is, I think, the ability to listen. And I think that, there are different ways to listen, and harnessing really what that means and how it influences the outcome is definitely one of the skills that I would say everyone would benefit from developing.
Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, sure. So I think, first of all, we are the organisation I work for is pretty much a legal NGO, so the vast majority of our staff are lawyers. So that is very much the angle that we come from on this. And we are, I suppose we're looking for a combination of things. We are definitely looking for people who have excellence in the kind of analysis that Michael's talked about, legal analysis, the ability to write clearly, for different audiences, because we're not just writing things for judges or for other legal experts. We're writing things for survivors. We're writing things for other NGOs and so forth as well. We're writing things for press releases. We're writing things for media. So a variety of different writing styles and experience of that kind of thing. We look often for experience of human rights litigation. We're looking for people to be able to think more broadly about our project work, thinking strategically about things like that, developing plans for effective delivery of goals and that kind of thing, skills of budgeting, of implementing projects with international partners, because that's a lot of what we do. Working empathetically and sensitively with both with survivors, with NGOs, with other stakeholders globally, with relevant levels of cultural sensitivity and so forth as well, at different levels, as I say, right from grassroots level right up to sort of UN level, special rapporteur level, and so forth. So we're looking for both that technical academic side of things, but also that ability to communicate with that wide range of other stakeholders. And I think the other thing I'd just stress, I mentioned it already, but to just stress the importance of having experience working with survivors of human rights violations in the work we do internationally, and domestically as well, is really crucial. And I know from dealing with lots of people who come through our office, how difficult that is to get for some people who are kind of starting off, but that really is important. A couple of other things that's good to have skills on: speaking in public. We're always doing things in public, and therefore that's really important. Experience of managing people, and those kind of skills. And obviously linguistic skills can be really useful. Anyone who's got skills beyond just English are going to be at an advantage working in the sector. So those are a few thoughts from my side anyway.
Thank you so much, Chris. Finally, Ben.
I would agree with everything that's been said already, no doubt. And yeah, I think particularly the point about communications skills, obviously an ability to communicate convincingly, but also empathetically with a range of actors is fundamental, I think, regardless of which area of this world you end up in, and whether you end up in an organization like like Michael's, like Helena's, like Chris's, or like mine. I mean, that's something across the board that you're going to need. And I would definitely agree with the point on languages. You know, I was absolutely rubbish at foreign languages at school, and I didn't enjoy it at all. But I have enjoyed learning them as an adult, and there's no doubt that they've been really, really important in being able to communicate with victims, especially with people who are on the sharpest end of this stuff, really understand their stories, the evidence, the issues, but also to communicate publicly and privately with whether it be judicial, political, or public actors. So yeah, I think language skills are fundamental in this sector. And if we're talking about skills for your career, they're certainly skills that will set you apart as well. You know, when I'm recruiting, we often really require those language skills, and we'll have to exclude people who don't have them sometimes. And I think a breadth of skills in general. You know, I've worked at large NGOs where there tends to be more specialists. You know, there are teams focusing on specific areas. I now head up a pretty small charity. If you're going to come and work for us, then I'll definitely be looking for the candidates who have got the specific skills we need, but have gained a broader array of skills and experience as well. And I think that even if you end up in a specialist role at a larger organization, having worked somewhere smaller and having gained that breadth of skills and expertise where you have to do a bit of everything can really stand you in good stead.
Thank you so much, everyone. So next, I mean, obviously that was a general array of skills that we would need. And like everyone was saying, you know, obviously it depends on the organization you're in or the position you're going to be working in. But a more specific question then. So do you think that in addition to a basic first degree, do you think a master's or a PhD or a higher degree, how much do you think that helps to firstly work as a human rights lawyer, but maybe more importantly for our audience, to be able to get that first foot in the door? So what do people think? How important are postgraduate qualifications? Michael?
Yeah, I'm always a little bit cautious at things like this about sort of explicitly advising people to enter further or postgraduate study. And that's mainly because I'm very mindful of the fact that it's not always an opportunity that's available to everyone, because these things are often expensive. They require time out of work. And so they're not always choices that are available to everybody. And in general, I would say, I mean, just speaking purely from the perspective that I have, is that academia and the law obviously have a very close relationship, but they're also in many ways quite different disciplines. And if you're interested in particularly sort of law reform or a role where you're at the forefront of changing the law, then you may be more interested in roles that have a sort of more of a policy kind of element rather than necessarily a legal role. And so that's always something that's worth thinking about when you're thinking about entering further academia or further study. In general, I would say choose something if it's something that you're really passionate about, if you have a real desire or interest in the subject, because it motivates you and you want to write about it and you want to read about it, rather than because you think, you know, it's going to advance your career or help create other opportunities for you. I think there are other ways that you can demonstrate that. And I think particularly the legal profession now is getting better at interrogating a bit more and looking simply past, you know, whether or not someone has, you know, the number of letters that somebody has after their name. So yes, do these things if it's something that really interests you and you have a passion for, but don't treat it as something that's obligatory in terms of advancing your career, because there are other ways that you can reflect that.
Thank you so much. Helena.
I agree with what Michael has said. And for me, I mean, everyone builds on their own experience. And I think for me, there are two ways to look at this, really. One is around the skills. I think skills are a great way to open doors. If you have developed a certain number of skills that are transferable, then you don't really need that postgraduate specialization. On the other hand, you may find that that's what's going to help you open a door, because it depends on what if there is a specific expertise and that specific knowledge is going to help you move the dial. I personally did do a postgraduate degree, and I really enjoyed it, not least because it gave me the opportunity to filter through my mind a little bit more than an undergraduate degree did. What is it exactly that I'm interested in doing in my work as a lawyer? But I don't think it's necessary, is what I'm saying. But I think, by the time you finish your undergrad degree, the reality is that you should probably have a sense of whether or not the postgraduate is something that you really want or need or not. So I think, going into it with an open mind and having learned a little bit about yourself during the journey of your undergraduate degree will help you answer that question.
Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, I think that I would say in the human rights sector, there is a need for a certain level of literacy in the kind of issues that international human rights deals with. So I suppose one of my questions would be, if you have that from your first degree, then perhaps it's not so necessary to go on to a further degree. You may remember just at the beginning, I said that for me, I didn't have that from the beginning. I came back and did a master's much later on. And I felt that I needed that to be able to make that switch into a more human rights kind of world. For the point of view of redress, we usually demand for our legal roles an advanced degree or equivalent experience. And that's partly not just due to knowledge and so forth, but it's partly due just to maturity and the fact that if people are coming straight from a first degree, then that's we're kind of looking for people with that little bit more maturity often. But for example, for us, if someone has got a first degree and, for example, 3 or 4 years of working with those relevant concepts in relevant areas of work, we wouldn't be really that bothered if they had a further degree of any kind. That wouldn't really be a big issue for us. In terms of advocacy, and we also recruit advocacy specialists at Redress, in my experience of recruiting those at Redress is that we're generally less bothered about the advanced degree because the experience for that kind of role is much more important than the kind of understanding the theory. So those would be my initial thoughts.
Thank you. Ben?
Thanks. Yeah, well, I'm not a lawyer either, which will probably become more and more apparent as the conversation goes on. But neither have I studied human rights, so after 15 years working in human rights, I guess I found my entry point really through that volunteering experience. So I'm definitely biased when it comes to this question. I'm sure there are some roles that you just absolutely do need the skill set that you can get in a certain postgraduate degree. And I'm sure that, as Helena said, for some roles, it can be a way to get your foot through the door. But I also know that there are some organizations and institutions that are placing an increasing value on something that Chris referred to earlier, which is whether you've had experience and interface with what I would call the sort of sharpest end of human rights issues. So engaging with victims, engaging with social movements, engaging with people who might be facing restrictions and backlash for working on these issues. That's certainly something that we look for and something that we prioritize, and we don't prioritize further education for the roles that we recruit for. So I think, yeah, it depends on the role, but I think that it's not only that human experience that you can glean from either volunteering or even doing kind of lower level roles in smaller organizations. You can often get a lot of that hands-on experience of things like the analytical work, writing, communication. You can often get that in a smaller organization at a lower level if you're showing willing and you're going to give it a go. So I think it depends on the job, but definitely a high value on that experience as much as that academic next step.
Thank you so much. So our next question, slightly different from the general thread we were talking about there, but in particular, it would be good to see what Helena thinks about this and her take on this. So obviously, we know that many law students who have an interest in human rights do gravitate towards human rights careers, and they want to become human rights specialists. But there are obviously many with very strong human rights or social justice values who also end up in corporate firms. So what do you think corporate law firms can be doing in terms of working either with law schools or training providers, etc., in order to align their own values or their own sort of corporate governance with human rights values and social justice principles? So Helena, if we could start with you, probably.
Yes, sure. So I think there are vast areas of law actually that have a cross section with human rights. And so, even if you go into a business law firm environment, like I did, the reality is increasingly we live in a context where there are so many touch points with human rights. And so, for example, we talked earlier, didn't we, about ESG, environmental, social, and governance considerations that have risen to the top of the agenda, really, for companies, firms, and governments around the world, accelerated by climate change concerns and social justice movements. So, something that obviously affects, for example, corporations around the world, because if they do not align their policies and embrace sustainability objectives, companies can have very significant fallout, like they will not be able to borrow money, they will lose customers because of reputational damage. And so really, these areas even of business law have a significant intersection with human rights. And for example, we did a big piece of work at Lex Mundi and ESG on supply chains and forced labor, including child labor. This is an enormous area that is very complex, but that is driving work towards, even in business environments, towards considerations of human rights. And just to give you an idea of the scale of it, according to The Economist, there was around $41 trillion worth of cross-border investments by multinationals by 2021. And we had the CEO of Hope for Justice and the Slave Free Alliance speak to us at a conference, who told us some 40 million people are caught up in exploitation in their supply chains. We're talking about, the third largest criminal enterprise making $150 billion in illegal profits for criminals. So just to give you an idea of the scale of something like this, we're talking about modern slavery. So how that, even in a business law environment, you're coming back to you needing to understand the implications of modern slavery. We're all watching generative AI. Wait and see the rules and regulations and the laws that are going to come out governing that, again, because of the concern around the liberties and human rights. So I guess the point that I'm making is that you can be a lawyer in all sorts of fields, but there is such a convergence these days around these issues of human rights and liberties. And so I think everybody will benefit in learning about that, in training in that space. And I think that, we all need to think about how do we support the law schools and the providers of these training programs so that they are really catching up with this need that is accelerating and that everybody needs to be able to grasp. And we have a pro bono foundation at Lex Mundi that is very successful. And what we do there is we make sure that lawyers working in our 160 law firms all around the world that are business law firms have an opportunity to come in through the pro bono foundation and to support pro bono work everywhere. So I think there is a need for this. I think, we all need to be thinking about how do we contribute to this knowledge and development that is really not just, in my view today, a narrow field of human rights, but that is becoming a convergence across all areas of law into these issues around human rights and liberties. So I think we all have our work cut out there. And certainly this is something we talk to our law firms a lot about. And we hear from the associates and the younger lawyers in the law firms how very, very important this development is and how keen they are to get involved and support the pro bono work and make a difference. So I think that for young people today, that impact is absolutely essential. It's essential to address that ambition in their careers, irrespective of where they practice, to have the ability to make that impact and to learn and be educated in how they get there.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you. I don't know if anyone else, I mean, I am keen to move on to other questions unless someone has anything pressing to say about that. Not really. Perfect. Thank you. So I guess, I mean, we were obviously speaking about soft skills previously. So just moving on to that specifically now. So I guess, you know, just a really broad question. What do we think are the soft skills needed for a career in human rights law? And more specifically, how do we think people can actually start to develop those early in their career, or indeed before they can even get that first position? So Michael.
Yeah, I mean, we've obviously touched on quite a lot of them already in early answers to these, in terms of what the key ones are. That to my mind, as a legal professional, they are absolutely essential, because the law is ultimately a people-centered, people-focused profession. And as I said at the outset, you need people that can communicate what are very complex legal ideas and concepts to their lay clients and help them to understand what's happening to them and why, and be their voice. And in many ways, these skills are more important than what you know. And in terms of the way that I think the legal profession, in particular the bar, recruits now, it's much more focused on what you can do rather than what you know, because you can learn how Section 6 of the Human Rights Act applies to public authorities in just a couple of days, but being able to actually distill these things and communicate them to someone in a way that they can understand takes a long time. And so to answer the second part of your question, is how you acquire them. Well, there's no substitute for practice, and that can be in as many different ways as you can find. The more you are put in situations where you have to do these things, where you have to explain to non-lawyers, if we just take the legal profession as an example, how particular things operate and how they apply to them, the better at it you will get. And there is simply no substitute for that.
Thank you so much, Michael. Maybe can we go to Chris first then? Chris.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, and building from what Michael was just saying, I think that making and really consciously focusing on making some of those complex concepts accessible to people who will not have any idea about where those concepts are coming from. We're ever so good as lawyers at using jargon and things which lay people simply will not understand, and we are kidding ourselves if we think that they have any chance of understanding us if we're using that kind of language. We have to make our language more accessible. The other thing that I was going to mention, just to build on what we've already been talking about, the need for people to get a wide experience of different contexts and cultures. And the reason that I talk about that is because I think that it helps us to develop a sensitive and I suppose a kind of a sincere ability to walk in someone else's shoes. And that's what we're really talking about here. It's being able to see what has happened to someone from their perspective, a survivor's perspective. And so that's the challenge for us, I think, is to be able to put ourselves in that position. The challenge as someone who's recruiting lawyers to do that kind of work is then how can you see that in someone's in the way that someone has presented their application? So therefore the challenge for you lot as potential applicants is, how do you demonstrate that experience? How do you demonstrate that ability to walk in another's shoes? And I suppose I'm always looking, as someone who's recruiting lawyers to do this kind of human rights work, I'm looking to try and get beyond, I'm caricaturing slightly here, but not very much, an application which is saying, I'm really interested in human rights. And I have seen applications which is talking about, I really enjoyed my course about the European Convention on Human Rights. That's simply not enough for us. We need that demonstrable commitment to it beyond just that kind of articulation of it in words. And we need that demonstrable commitment, and we need the demonstrable experience that goes along with that.
Thank you so much. Ben, maybe Ben?
Yeah, to pick up on all those points that I agree with. So I guess, yeah, I would hone in on three things. So definitely, firstly, to pick up on Chris's last point, a demonstration of commitment and an understanding of what these issues look like in communities for victims, in reality, and to be able to show what have you done and what have you learned from those engagements and that interface and that participation in those sort of grassroots or sharp end issues. Secondly, definitely communication in all its aspects. And so we'd be looking at, where have you communicated effectively about human rights issues? I agree. Where have you done that without the jargon? What have you written? Where have you spoken? Social media is also so important in this world these days. So where have you communicated effectively would be the second thing. And thirdly, I think demonstrating that you have an understanding of political as well as legal advocacy. And what I mean by that is that, human rights are ultimately political in the way that they're contested. Decision makers are political. Humans take decisions, and how we approach them, how we communicate them, and how we situate our specific human rights goals within broader advocacy strategies will ultimately define how those decision makers react. So I think it's worth investing time in learning and participating and understanding kind of broader human rights categories, not solely the legal aspects of them. And yeah, I think that is one of the reasons why a lot of people who have volunteered with PBI do get roles in human rights organizations subsequently, because they're able to demonstrate those three things: the commitment and the interface, the communication, and the political as well as legal nature of human rights advocacy. And I think that's what will help you stand out when you apply for jobs.
Perfect. Thank you, Ben. Helena.
Yeah, I think all of that makes a lot of sense from where I'm sitting, obviously not as a human rights lawyer, but I do think that showing that you understand a little bit the issues and the context around specific things, so that understanding of the situation, how it sits in, as Ben said, the political context, what's going on around the actual narrow situation. I've always believed that showing that you understand the bigger picture can be a differentiator. The skills that Chris described, sort of that open mind, the interaction with very, very people. So just develop yourself through exposure to lots of different people and situations will really help you see the bigger picture, because you have to start with the bigger picture as you delve down into the narrow and specific things. And I think certainly when I was a younger lawyer, it helped me to say, that I spoke more than one language, that I'd lived in different countries, or that I'd worked with different people, that I'd exposed myself to different, I think just really expand yourself as a person as much as you can. Don't be afraid to try different things, try different jobs. Ultimately, it's a journey, and you build yourself up as a person to be able to go on that journey. And so that I think really just that take a holistic look as well as at yourself and your skills and how you approach situations is a good way to start.
Thank you so much. So we do have some questions already coming in. Obviously, we have, we can continue this discussion as well, but maybe we can just sort of mix things up a bit. So we'll take one question that was, I think that is probably a very core question here, and particularly again for people trying to enter the profession. So it's the question is essentially about the catch-22 situation that many entry-level people find themselves in. So obviously you need experience to get your first position, but you need your first position to get some experience. So are there any practical tips or advice or suggestions we can give people? What do people in that position do? So they've graduated, they may or may not have a higher degree, but now they're looking for that first position. How do they get it? So Chris, maybe.
Thanks so much, Shoaib, for asking me to respond first. I mean, as I said earlier, it is a difficult issue. It is a bit of a catch-22. I feel that Ben wants to talk a bit about volunteering, and I'd be really interested to hear what he wants to say about that. because I think that that's the way that I got my initial experience in the sector was by volunteering, and that could be somewhere abroad from here. It could be somewhere in your local community. It could be doing, volunteering in a food bank. It could be volunteering at the CAB. It could be those kinds of things are the things which are going to give you that what Ben's referred to as that kind of work at the sharp end, where you're dealing with people who are struggling, who are marginalized, who perhaps are victims of one or other kind of struggle, and I think that those are the kinds of things that might be a way of getting the kind of some of the things that we've been talking about, so that you can demonstrate that commitment, you can demonstrate that experience of engaging with people who are not necessarily from the background that you're from, and so we're it is difficult because we're often looking for people who do come with experience, and we accept that. So I certainly think that is a difficult issue, but I'd be really interested to hear what Ben's thoughts were about the volunteering issue.
Right, thank you, Chris. So Ben, then I guess Ben.
Yeah, I mean, I remember vividly marked in my memory this moment where I'm thinking, I want to work in this, and everyone's asking for experience. How am I going to get it? And Googling internships and seeing that all the UN ones that I fancy were either in Geneva or New York, which are the most expensive cities on earth, and really pulling my hair out about this. So it's not easy. And I think, we shouldn't make assumptions about people's ability to work for free or to, or to pay for further education, which was something that I was very worried about at the time. I do think that there are a lot of different ways to volunteer, and I agree with Chris. They don't have to be explicitly working or volunteering with a human rights charity or doing legal human rights work. I think something as we're going through the large numbers of applications that we get for jobs, that will stand out. Has somebody done something in their spare time? And like I say, can they articulate what they took from that experience and explain to us how it will help them to contribute to our goals and our mission? There are things you can do in the evening. Obviously I still volunteer in the evenings with for a homeless charity. So I think there are things you can do alongside paid work and studies. Like I've plugged PBI because I think it's a very complete experience, but it's also one that's very demanding. If you do volunteer with one of our frontline teams, that's a 1-year voluntary role. You don't get paid, but you get all your expenses paid for. That's one of the reasons why I signed up to PBI, frankly, was that I didn't need money to do it, but you're not going to leave rich either. But it is a long-term commitment, and it's one that's very intense. You can also volunteer. I know a lot of NGOs have internships or volunteer stints at their offices in London and elsewhere. We do. So yeah, I think it's worth a good Google. And whilst we advertise these positions, and there are certainly times of the year that we can't deal with piles of unsolicited requests to volunteer, if people do write to us and they've got a very compelling explanation of why they want to do this and how they could help us, then we're always on the lookout for good candidates to volunteer in our offices. So I think that for me is the obvious way of getting that experience.
Thank you so much. Helena.
Sorry, I lost the sound.
Sorry, did you want to answer the question?
Sorry, would you just repeat the question, because I've been in and out of sound.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, so I mean, mainly it's generally about any tips or techniques, practical things that people can do. How do they obtain that first position? So obviously, anytime people want that first position, they ask, for experience. So how do people get that experience so they can get their first position?
Yeah, I agree with what I've just heard now, but I think going back a little bit in time, I think when you're a student at school, starting to get, you look for opportunities to do shadowing. I've seen young people do that, and it helps you start getting your foot in the door. You start meeting people. You then will line yourself up for internships. So I think that actually you really need to start as early as you can. And I would certainly look at, while you're at school, trying to get some of the shadowing opportunities. Sometimes internships are only really advertised for students at university in, third year or second year onwards of university. But, still go out there, do some research, and put yourself, as I said earlier, don't be afraid, try things, knock on people's doors. You could be a first year university student, and you could still actually find that you can get an internship. Try abroad as well. You'd be amazed how there can be opportunities that are open up in the summer, or internships in organizations that, because you're an English speaker, that could be an advantage. Just really look at that, is there an edge somewhere? And don't wait for it to be on offer. Just really start knocking on doors and think about yourself as somebody who might be a little bit different than the typical profile available. For the internships that are advertised, try to go in a little bit earlier, really thinking outside of the box and challenging, the model that's already there, to say, actually, no, I'm not going to wait till I'm 2 or 3 years into uni. I want to try to get this internship before. I do think it's a very difficult thing, but somehow we all got started, didn't we? Somehow we all found that door that we could knock on, that job that we could apply for, that internship, that just really look a little bit outside of the box is what I would say.
Perfect. Thank you, Helena. Michael.
Yeah, well, not a huge amount to add to what I think were 3 really comprehensive and good answers already to that one. I mean, I have a lot of sympathy for people who find themselves in the position that's been described. I think the short answer is I think people have already said, you've just got to cast your net as wide as possible. There is no role anywhere that doesn't allow you to practice some skill. So it's about casting your net wide and thinking about actually what am I putting into practice here? What am I doing? And how can I map that against what the places I ultimately want to get to want?
Thank you. So our next question then, again from the audience. So I guess it follows on from something Chris was saying, probably inspired by that just now. But what the question exactly, I'll read it out. Can you please give examples of how one can demonstrate that commitment to human rights? So I think that's fairly straightforward what they want to know. So in practical terms, how does one express that commitment in an application or indeed an interview? So Chris, I guess we'll start with.
Thanks. I suppose the sort of things that I'm thinking about are that, if someone's coming and sitting before me and saying that they're committed to human rights, I'm kind of asking why. Well, how can I see that? Have they, been a really active member of their amnesty group at uni, or have they spent 6 months working in a refugee camp in Sudan, or have they been working on a human rights newspaper in their law school, or there isn't a single thing that I could tell you that is going to demonstrate that commitment. But I think that I'm looking for something more than just someone who says that they're committed to human rights. There's got to be, and when I say human rights, I stress again that I'm looking at that in a very broad sense. And I'm not just thinking about, things that are traditional human rights. I'm looking at it in terms of rights within the UK, for example, on housing issues, or as, Ben's talked about, volunteering in a homeless context. As I mentioned, food banks, things which are responding to people's needs where they are struggling. And I think that anything like that would start to make me think that someone's got more than just a commitment on paper, and that this is actually something that they want to live out. That's what I mean.
Thank you so much. Ben?
Wholeheartedly agree with that. I think we often hear from the people that we work with about their human rights struggle, you know, and it is a struggle, it's a battle, it's a long-term thing, when we all know, as everyone who's tuned in knows, the biggest human rights wins in history have been long-standing, difficult things that people have had to work extremely hard for, and in a range of creative ways. And I think, as Chris says, you know, it can be, there's all sorts of things that you could have done to have contributed to that human rights struggle, and we just want to see that you have, and that you are, and that you've got something to tell us about what you've learned from that. And it, again, it's a holistic approach. It can be anything that you've done locally or internationally, and voluntarily or professionally. But I think we want to just see that you've been doing something to contribute to that human rights struggle.
Perfect. Thank you, Helena.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. So I'm actually joining from Vietnam, and my internet's been misbehaving. I'm here for work. I think when you go for a job interview, especially when you're young, it's important to realize that the person sitting in front of you is likely to be pretty experienced at interviewing. And I think there is nothing like sincerity, and storytelling is very effective. I can give you a small example. As ridiculous as it may sound, I actually went for a job interview when I was young for a job that I really didn't want, but the headhunter wouldn't get off my back. And when they said to me, "Why do you want to work here?" I said, "Well, I don't really, and here's why." And they offered me the job. And so I do think that, you know, when you're looking at, I assume in human rights, people have a story that is driving them to want to work in human rights. And I think just really being sincere and open, and rather than think about, oh, this is what I should be saying, is just, you know, be honest about why you're there, what your story is, and what's driving that passion in you. And I think that's always a great way to have an interview, and it sometimes will unlock some pretty amazing and refreshing conversations if you're willing to do that.
Thank you. Michael.
Yeah, I think part of it is, I mean, I think the question was about how do you demonstrate commitment to human rights? And in many ways, I think part of the challenge that question underpins is that you almost will have an easier time if you break that down into its constituent parts, because we've already mentioned this several times already, but human rights as a field, as a concept is so, it's all pervasive. It touches on all aspects of our society, of our legal constitutional framework, and so on. And actually, if you start to break it down into the bits that you think particularly interest you, or that you want to be more involved with, whether that's the relationship between the individual and the state, how it applies to state actions across borders, whether it's more about law reform and how we can, enshrine human rights better in our legal system and that sort of thing. If you think more narrowly about what it is that really excites you about this as an area, you'll probably find answering that question about demonstrating a commitment comes a little bit easier. Rather than thinking about it sort of holistically, because, as you know, you've already heard, there are so many different examples and ways in which it interacts with the work that we do and the world that we live in.
Thank you so much. So I think I'm just conscious of time now. So maybe we'll come back to another question if we have time after this. But maybe if all the speakers would take just around 1 minute each and just summarize, or just what is one big takeaway for you that people can take away or think about later after this session. So obviously, again, focusing on the skills, the competencies, how people get that first foot in the door to work in human rights. So, Chris.
Yeah, so I would say that maximizing your experience is probably the key thing, albeit I appreciate there are obstacles to that, and I totally acknowledge those, and we've talked about them. But think about how you can put more energy into the non-academic side, if you like, for some of these roles that we've all been talking about, the things that you need to be able to demonstrate, commitment, experience. Those are not things which are going to be evident from your academic achievements. So you need to be putting effort into developing that experience. And I think that that's what really makes people stand out in the applications that I see, is that other experience that they come with, experience of working with with NGOs, including in the Global South, not just in the Global South, but including that experience of working with survivors of human rights violations, or those who are at the margins of our own society, even in the UK. Experience of working in a team. That's so important in the human rights sector, and it's nothing to do with what you can demonstrate of your academic ability. If you can't come to an organization and work with other human beings, then you're going to be at a distinct disadvantage when you make those applications. And I will regularly ask people to demonstrate and give me examples of how they have dealt with issues within teams, and how you can demonstrate that you can work in those kind of team environments. So don't just think about the academic side. Look at how you can demonstrate your broad experience, and then you'll be well on the way.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Ben, your takeaway for today?
Yeah, similar line. I'd reiterate the importance of taking a holistic and not only an academic approach, the importance of gaining that breadth of experience and expertise, and probably reiterate 4 points in particular. One, the language skills. They will be really useful, and not just in your job, but in life. I think you'll get so much more out of life, and you'll stand out on those applications. Secondly, those communication skills, verbal, written, social media, the works. Thirdly, the importance of understanding the political advocacy and the human rights campaigns, as well as the legal advocacy and the human rights law. And fourthly, finding and valuing volunteer experiences. And if you're keen to volunteer with PBI, whether it's a year in one of our frontline projects, mostly in Latin America, or in our office, or otherwise, you can go to peacebrigades.org.uk or look for PBI UK on social media and sign up to our newsletter and find out about the opportunities.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Helena.
It's difficult to add to all of that. I would just say, remember to develop yourself as a person, expand your skills. And sometimes, if the front door doesn't open, try the side door. You might be able to work in a different field, but there's a pro bono component, and that will give you access at a later date and a different time back into human rights. I truly believe there is a convergence and a connection in various areas of business and law and we're seeing increasingly that focus is significant now on liberties and human rights and protection of privacy and all sorts of things that touch people in different ways, and that's across the business world and across many areas of law. So I think that remembering that there is that breadth of opportunity and gearing yourself up to make the best of that and enjoy opportunities there. Just expand yourself as a person, and just go forward and try things and take risks, and try the side door if the front door isn't open.
Thank you so much. Finally, Michael.
Yeah, I mean, it's one that I think I've already mentioned, but I'll say it again because it benefits from repetition. I think as widely as possible about how you are showcasing your skills, because every role that you do in any environment that you have ever worked in entails using or developing particular skills, whether you know it or not. So the question for you is, how can you map those skills that you've acquired and have been putting into practice every day against what makes a good or desirable, human rights lawyer or policy official or whatever. And the reason I say that is because if you can get that experience directly in the sector, working in organizations, firms, and so on, or through volunteering, that's great. But really think as wide as possible, and then practice how you're going to sell that to someone. I look through applications for mini pupillage or pupillage. If someone is able to persuade me of the skills that they put into practice, selling coffees at a music festival and how they translate, that is more compelling to me than someone who gives a fairly bland sort of anodyne account of whatever it is, volunteering at their local law centre, if there's no mapping of those skills into what they know we do every day. So I think that's the one from me.
Thank you so much, everyone. Sadly, that's all we have time for. I'm sure this discussion could just go on with the wonderful speakers we have. But thank you so much, all four of you. And yeah, I mean, I'm just keen to obviously end on time, because working in human rights, one thing that you need to be always aware of is never keep Stephen Cragg Casey waiting. So I'm sure he's ready there with his next panel. So I'm now ready to hand over to them. Thanks again to all our speakers and everyone watching. Now I will hand over to Stephen Cragg Casey, who is, of course, chair of the Bar Human Rights Committee. You will have heard from him this morning as well. So thank you, everyone. Good luck to him and our next speakers. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I was listening to all that, and it was a tremendous session, practical information about how to get on in the human rights world. There are two takeaways from that. Sell coffee at a music festival, I think, was the first one, and the second one, which I really like, is don't keep Stephen Cragg Casey waiting. I think my family need to have that communicated to them quite often, actually. So thank you everyone for joining us again at the end of the session today. We've had some absolutely tremendous sessions in this seminar. The closing session is going to be fairly short. It's entitled Human Rights Futures, How Can I Make a Difference?, which is quite a big subject, but I think you will have quite a lot of the tools you're going to need to address that question from what you've heard so far. With me in this final session, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Felicity Casey, who's International King's Counsel London and Melbourne, and a professor of legal practice. And delighted to have you with us, Felicity. You were threatening to turn up in a wig and gown and everything, I think, at one stage, but and you are on mute as well.
Sorry, we're not sitting today, so I've turned up normally dressed.
Well done. Well, fantastic. In fact, though, we did have one barrister who did do that. So we haven't been deprived of the view. And also joining me again from the opening session is Louis Asquith from Russell Cook, and Louis, as you will call, is vice chair of Human Rights Lawyers Association. So we've got about 20 minutes or so to wrap up and to look at any questions which arrive in the Q&A. Felicity, I thought I'd give you first go, given you haven't had a chance to speak so far. And I picking up on your role of professor of legal practice. One of the questions which I think has been at the heart of what we've been talking about today is what law students and early career practitioners can actually do to help them embark on their careers. From your point of view, are there specific skills, experiences, or mindsets they should cultivate to reach their goals in a human rights career?
Oh, I knew you'd ask me the questions in a different order from when I was ready, but look, I think I think there are two that I've developed. That's the most I can do, is pass on my experience. And one is resilience. I suppose we used to call it a thick skin. So I've stood up to prosecute in cases involving women and children as victims in a range of different cases very, very early on. When I first started, these cases just didn't happen in court. And occasionally laughed at that I wasn't going to be able to prove a case because of the sort of woman in the witness box. Now I'm in silk, I only defend, and I've stood up to defend in the International Criminal Court. I shout a lot about over-criminalisation and over-incarceration of Black and Indigenous youth in homicide. I've defended in terrorism trials. They're not a position to be in without having to be resilient and be able to stand up against rather a lot of pressure. So that's quite important. And the second thing that goes with that is really nerdy, but you have to read. Don't just read the cases, because that means the law will never change. You have to read the academic research. And I supervise students in intensives, on their masters, honours papers, and it's one of my greatest pleasures is to see my students go on to be lawyers and come and find me on LinkedIn and seeing what they're doing. But read. The amount of cases I go into where I'll produce an academic report to a judge and a courtroom full of barristers who haven't read it, and I find that really shocking. So read for pleasure, read because you have to. It will make a significant difference to your cases and to the person that you're representing. So maybe a relatively ordinary answers, but they've been extraordinary. I've had extraordinary moments in my career where reading the academic research and having my tin hat on and going in and saying you're all getting it wrong it is what's worked for me.
Yeah, thanks. I think both those are really interesting, actually, aren't they? Resilience, though, is perhaps something you have to learn and build up. I mean, I think there might be a lot of people on the call who think, "Oh, well, I don't feel that confident at the moment." You have to take a deep breath and go in there and build on that experience over a while, I think, don't you?
Well, I've got quite a young junior in a murder trial at the moment, and I gave her a witness. I said, "Off you go. I know you can do it." And I made her do it. And she did a brilliant job. She was lovely, perfect cross-examination. Got a laugh in a homicide trial that I don't think she was expecting to get. And it's very rare. She did it absolutely beautifully. So sometimes you have to be challenged by the people who are mentoring you or leading you or supervising you and can tell you that you can do it. So I think that's our role as well. More senior people need to be able to encourage those to do it and open yourself up to those sorts of things that you feel nervous about. Just give it a go. No,
a similar thing happened to me when I was in court with in a bail application, and I was a pupil barrister at the time, and the barrister I was with was asked to make the bail application, and he just stood up and said, "Oh, I'm not going to make this bail application. Stephen Cragg is," and I didn't even know I was going to do it, so I just had to stand up and start talking. I think that's been a bit of an extreme example. But it's not
great not giving you time to prepare. I have to say, I gave my junior time to prepare.
And then also, I think I agree about reading as well. It's really important, isn't it? Because we're often trying to change the law, and if you're trying to change the law, then what the judges will have so far is the law as it is.
And they don't want it to change, you know. And if you're bringing something new into court, they're very resistant. So absolutely, if you can wave a professor's article at them, then that sometimes helps, not always.
That's a start, isn't it? I remember one human rights lawyer many years ago said to me, if you're winning all your cases, you're not bringing the right kind of cases, because on the basis that you're not always
you do have to learn to lose. Yes,
you're not always going to get there first time round.
Yeah. I've never got used to that
journey rather than actually sort of putting it off first time round. Louis, have you got anything you want to add to those?
Yeah, thoughts? I suppose just to segue on from that, I think resilience is such an important word, and I was pleased, Stephen, that you said it is something that you develop, because it can come naturally, I think, to some, but certainly those I speak to, it's a trait that you build. So, and getting stuck in is part of that, and you're going to have difficult days, and you'll have some great days, and it's all part of the pendulum swinging, isn't it? I think a few other things I would add to the list in terms of mindset and skill sets. The first is you don't have to look or sound a particular way, and I say this as a proud northerner and someone who still, in all honesty, I can come up against some biases in everyday life, subconscious mainly, But it's really important not to be put off if you sound a particular way, if you sound northern or have a regional accent of any kind. You don't have to look a particular way. So it's an important point to make, and I wanted to make it. Other things that I would say, meet people. So networking, getting yourself out there is one of the most important skill sets to acquire, I think, as a aspiring lawyer or junior lawyer. People know people in this industry, and I think it's about not being shy. And if you are shy, overcoming that and still entering into spaces and rooms and saying hello, using the likes of LinkedIn. I'm really acutely aware that a lot of events are London-centric, and I know that isn't easy for everybody to access. So have a look to see what is available virtually, making sure that you're connecting and using the means and tools that you may have wherever you are. And I can attitude, I suppose, just to build on what Felicity was saying. One of the best pieces of advice that I was ever given and still carry with me it was after I qualified. Actually, I worked for a couple of members of the European Parliament just before the Brexit referendum. And one of the MEPs I worked for said to me, even if you don't feel ready, if somebody offers you an opportunity, say yes and put yourself out there, do something, because if you make mistakes, often they're not as big as you think, number one, but secondly, you'll learn from them, and most of the time you'll do a good job, and suddenly you've acquired a confidence that you won't have done had you not said yes to things. So say yes is another thing I'd say.
Yeah, and I think that again, it sometimes can be quite a hard thing to do. You know, go to seminars and asking questions and meeting people. Of course, there's a number of ways of doing it, aren't there? You can always contact someone to just go for coffee or something and try and do it on a smaller scale than trying to work the room, which can be a bit of a daunting, a task when you're starting out, but eventually you do have to work the room when it comes to it. So, but there are ways of building up those skills and meeting people. It's always easier to work a room when you know a few people in the room. I always find. All right, okay. Well, I am going to take the questions we got out of order, and there's another one I thought was really interesting. It's the one about diversity and inclusion. Diversity and inclusion are vital to the legal profession and human rights work. What strategies can be employed to improve diversity and inclusion in legal education and within human rights organisations, and how can the next generation advocate for more inclusive practices? Do you want to have a go at that first, Louis?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a really tricky question to answer, and I suppose the first thing that comes to mind when I think about it is that authenticity is really important. So for firms, chambers, whatever it is, law schools looking to diversify their pool, it's really important not to do it because you're supposed to do it. Do it because you truly want to reap the benefits of having an eclectic mix of individuals. I think small things that we need to flag, the assumption people have access to technology, don't assume that, make it clear on application forms, etc., that's able to be provided. Acknowledge that, I think, just from a socioeconomic perspective, which I think is a lot of the problem currently that we have, is that assumption people have the means, assumption people have the time, assumption people can do, because it's not always the case. So making arrangements, offering alternative ways of doing things so people can fit around caring responsibilities, etc., is super important. And offering things outside of London. Again, I often toot my northern trumpet, but I think it's a really important that chambers, firms, etc., make sure they're putting on opportunities for those outside of the capital city, because it feels, and I say this from experience, it feels next to impossible sometimes when you're outside of London to get involved and to acquire that experience. So, and that's on us to be thinking, well, let's go to them, let's go to you, So that's something else I'd suggest. And finally, internships, etc. Pay your people. If you're asking for people's time, pay them is what I'd say, and pay them well. Don't just pay them a living wage. And certainly, if you're getting them to come to London, pay the travel, pay accommodation, make sure they're comfortable, and that'll open up a whole new world for so many people.
I think that's really important, isn't it? Because the whole world of internships, which aren't paid, just excludes huge swathes of people who've got such a lot to give. Thanks so much for that, Felicity. Anything to add to that?
Look,
Also,
it's such a huge
diversity.
It's such a huge topic, and obviously it's been an issue for my whole career. I'm 30 years at the bar next year, and it's still an issue that I'm often the only woman silk in court. Not at the moment, which is lovely, but often the only woman silk in the court. Still quite often the only woman in court. And I deliberately went to my current chambers on the basis there were a bunch of blokes doing really serious criminal cases, and I wasn't going to get them unless I was in a chambers that had that sort of work. So I went to somewhere where I had to say, clerk me like a bloke, which is ridiculous. You should be getting the work anyway. And I do get that work now. I can say I do homicide, terrorism, war crimes, financial crime, but it hasn't been easy. And I've really, the whole course of my career has been me kicking doors open that are meant to be closed to me, and I've had some success at that, and I hope that inspires people younger than me. I think it's important to think about what the profession and the judiciary can do. I work in the criminal bar in Victoria, Australia as well, and there's been some brilliant work being done on collecting statistics, engaging law firms on equitable briefing and collecting the statistics of those. And I went to an event recently where those statistics were on a big screen at the dinner, and there was a panel discussion about those statistics, and there were law firms that were really not very good at ethical briefing and other law firms that were brilliant. The judges had got engaged and they'd collected data that could then be analysed of how many women were speaking in court. And I did a case a few years ago where I stood up and said, I'm going to present this part of the argument and my junior is going to do the other part of the argument. And the judge said, I think you need leave for that. And I said, oh, do I? Well, can I have leave then? Had no idea. And apparently it had been under discussion for 6 months to get rid of this requirement for leave. And within a month it was gone. And so there are some sort of insidious practices that need to go where juniors are not called upon to speak. And that does inhibit women in particular, people of colour in particular. You'll find that men often lead men, and that juniors are not always given the opportunities. And in that appeal, she'd done the case in the court below. So I can do the jurisprudence, but she can do the issue on the case itself. So diversity and inclusion isn't going to come about. We're not going to be diverse unless everybody works to see where are the problems and how can we fix them. I have great hope for the generation, I don't want to say below me, that's really rude, the next generation, younger than me. And I love working some of my juniors. They don't have any of those issues with who they're working with. They've grown up at university where there were the same, there was a really diverse cohort at university, and they just don't see what I see and have seen during my career. So look, I'll try and learn from younger people and say, what do you need? What's going on? And do what I can. And I'm just very noisy about these things. I'm not on many committees because they drive me mad, but you've got to find someone who's can help you be noisy if there's a problem, and someone who will help you call things out if they need to be called out. And I make a bit of a joke that I'm Marmite in England and Vegemite in Australia, because I do try and call everything out. So I think there are a range of strategies to make sure that the merit test isn't a panacea for significant and entrenched problems, particularly in the criminal bar.
Yeah. No, I think I'm really impressed with the younger generation of which I'm probably still part. I'm not sure, but of barristers in chambers and their commitment to human rights and the causes for which I think when some of us were first at the bar, first lawyers, it was quite unusual to have lawyers doing that kind of work, and there's now a solid group of younger lawyers who are very confidently doing that work. I think there are still problems. There are still problems with inclusion and diversity, but as you say, I think some younger barristers feel more confident about addressing those head on these days than perhaps they were able to do in the future. So that's really good. I'm going to ask a big question. I was sort of going to try and avoid, although I suppose that was a big question.
They're not small, no.
I'm going to ask, that's what is a bigger question, which is about the future, which is always hard to predict. But I thought it might be good to finish on this one. As the field of human rights continues to evolve, what emerging trends and opportunities should the next generation of human rights defenders be aware of and be prepared to embrace? I think they might well know what they are already, but I think it'd be useful for us to offer our views as well. Do you want to go first on that, Felicity?
Okay, yeah, it is an enormous question, and I think for me, there's a real problem with authoritarianism, and that I think human rights is a challenge too. I'm not a political animal, but I have used the law where I consider it needs to be changed and tried to present arguments in court. If that fails, I make submissions to government, and I've managed to be involved in changing the law on issues such as FGM, reproductive rights, modern slavery, made a submission to 2 governments on women, peace and security in Afghanistan. So I think the landscape is very difficult for human rights defenders. The suffering of attacks to human rights defenders across the world is something that we really have to recognise, again, call out, make sure we understand that this is increasingly a difficult space to be in, to advocate for people who otherwise don't have a voice, where we do, and we can use that voice to try and create law reform, policy changes, getting, for example, women at the negotiation tables in peace talks, or at least women's issues on the table. Perhaps a little shout out is important from me for those who defend. You know, one of the greatest human rights is your right to a fair trial. And I think being defence counsel is and having a defence framework is what gives courts their legitimacy. Otherwise, it makes a criminal trial, whether you're in the International Criminal Court, in our case of Al Hassan over the last year or so, as I've been, whether you're in an English criminal court in the old-fashioned environs of the Bailey, or in a criminal court in other jurisdictions as I am, you have significant value. You're giving the court its legitimacy by being there, by testing the evidence, by putting forward defences, by advocating in a way that the public can try and understand how defences work and why someone might have a defence. So for me, I think the future is about revisiting those issues of miscarriages of justice. In Britain, we've had post office scandal. We've now got the imprisonment for public protection scandal. And in my opinion, we have a joint enterprise scandal that the public really need to learn about. So for me, the future is about recognising the value of the human rights, the human right to a fair trial. And in that justice doesn't become a word that makes a trial an inconvenience between charge and sentence, that we really, really understand the value of defending those who are up against the power of a state or an international in an international court, so that fair trials actually happen and we can have confidence in the outcomes.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Louis?
Yeah, I had a few thoughts. I know going to take some questions out, so I'll be super quick.
Well, I'm just having a look, and I'm not sure we've got any. Right.
I can see there's one in the chat around internships that I'm keen to address, and I think so we can. So I'll try and make this speedy. Yeah, I mean, just to make the point, obviously this year, 10th of December, will be the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and I think, and obviously the document recognises the responsibility to protect every person, including human rights defenders, and yet, 75 years after that adoption, we see, as Felicity says, human rights defenders continuing to face risks and experiencing sort of various obstacles, etc. So it's not an easy future, in my opinion. I've pulled out a few areas of human rights law that I reckon will gain more and more traction, and I'll rattle through those. So technology and human rights, obviously the advancement of technology will present opportunities and challenges, which will be a really super fascinating area, I think. Strengthening the rights of marginalised communities. Climate change, obviously, will be an incredibly important area of international human rights law. Business and human rights, I think, will be quite interesting, sort of corporate accountability. Intersectionality and multiple forms of discrimination. I think there's more conversation around that, which will grow, and sort of recognising that individuals face multiple forms of discrimination based on sort of various intersecting identities. And then finally, another one I've pulled out is the protection of digital rights. Will be an interesting area. I know, Stephen, you'll no doubt have your own thoughts on that, but I thought it might be helpful to those listening, watching, just to hear a few bullet points of sort of the areas of practice that are definitely emerging and no doubt will be coming through in force in the near future. Yeah.
No, I think that's a fantastic list, and I had quite a few of those on my list. So I won't go through my list, but I think what's important is the traditional human rights organisations, like BHRC, for example, sometimes haven't focused on things like environmental human rights and those kind of things, and ought to be doing more of that kind of thing. So if you're a young lawyer out there who thinks that organisations such as BHRC, HRLA aren't doing enough on those kind of things, then join, because we're open to change and open to move on to new layers of human rights areas, which all of those, I think, are ones which are going to be very important in the next few years. So I just have a look at the question we have got. There's one. Well, I think someone's asked a question about whether climate change litigation is part of an environmental action or human rights action. I think the answer is it's both. It must be that environmental issues affect human rights, and human rights affect environmental issues. And I'm aware of that, having been on a delegation to Guatemala at the start of the year, looking at indigenous land rights, land rights of indigenous people in Guatemala, and it's clear that both of those areas were very much engaged by what we were seeing there. The other question we've got is a very specific one about internships, saying that finding internships is hard, especially when they are specifying applicants of 25 years or under. What can you recommend? I'm not sure we can do very much about age limits. It seems to me very short-sighted to offer internships with an age limit, because you should be encouraging people surely with different kind of skills.
Imagine it'd be a funding issue.
Yeah, as well. But I'm not sure that there's very much we can do.
I have to say, I
Felicity.
I would. If someone told me about one of those, I'd be prepared to write to the organisation without identifying the young person. So it would be good to raise that with the right body. So if you don't want to do it yourself, then raise it with the Bar Council or with the Law Society or with the governing body for the organisation, or find someone to raise it for you if you're nervous about doing it yourself, because I don't like the sound of that at all. I always pay
No.
my research assistants personally as well, and I think a lot of barristers don't. They think they're giving a student an opportunity to do a bit of research. So I think there's some individual accountability as well as organisational accountability. And look, I've had students working on internships with me where they get credit points in their university. So you could perhaps give one of your cases to a university that has a clinic to work with you, so that if you can't pay them, then at least they get credit points. And one of the cases that I've had students work on with me is about historic slavery reparations, and the overlap there between corporate responsibility, state responsibility, human rights and the environment is just absolutely fascinating when you think about the devastating near genocide that happened in some Pacific islands. So you can give students and interns really great opportunities to work on cases that are going to form future law, if you like, and should have formed some of the law already, but make sure they're not exploited, because that's the very issue that you're writing about. And you know, find enough money to pay somebody, or find them an opportunity where they can use that as a credit points in their units at their university. And I think universities are really good now about having legal clinics and centres and places where students can work on those sorts of things. So find out what's in your local university that might be able to help you as a practitioner, to support you if you've got a really big case, and especially if you're not earning very much money on it, which happens in human rights type cases, or you're acting pro bono. So there are ways that that you can have support without exploiting people in a work situation.
Thank you. Louis, you got your hand up?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I thought I'd
You have to, otherwise I'll just keep talking.
Aware of time, so just to quickly add, I know about this internship with Justice. So Justice are a fantastic organisation. My hunch is that there'll be a funding, sort of the funder will have a cap on the age. However, just to echo Felicity's sentiments, write to them and say, look, I appreciate that this particular internship is for under 25s and I don't satisfy that criterion. However, I want to come and work for you. When will the next opportunity be, etc.? Show your enthusiasm, reach out and see what they say. I mean, you know, I know I'm confident in saying that Justice will be very happy to discuss opportunities.
And say that's a fantastic organisation, and without Justice, for example, I couldn't have appeared in the Shamima Begum appeals. So they're a fantastic organisation. I feel sure they'll have thought this through, and they'll have other opportunities for people of other ages. So I think that's exactly the right advice. Just make an inquiry, because I'm not convinced that's the type of organisation that I was having a go at a minute ago. So I didn't realise who it was, but in principle, my views are the same. And I think Louis is right. But at the same time, if it's a particular organisation, then contact them and ask, and any issues, contact Stephen, and Stephen can ask.
I'll sort it out for you. And I think all the organisations I've been involved with over the years value experience, life skills when it comes to human rights, because I think as lots of speakers have said today, you've got to have those life skills, or have a way of achieving or obtaining those life skills to actually be a good human rights lawyer or human rights defender. But we are past our time. I'm sure we could rattle away for quite a lot longer, but we are going to close now. Thank you so much, both of you, for your contribution this afternoon. I've been listening all day, and it's been a fantastic day, I think, and one we will bound to repeat at some point. It has been recorded. It will be on our YouTube channel, because we're a modern 21st century organisation, and there will be a report, because there's always a report, but that will make sure that's as useful as it possibly can be to young lawyers and students coming through interested in this area. But with that, we conclude this virtual panel of the Bar Human Rights Committee and the Human Rights Lawyers Association, London Lawyers Committee, Human Rights Careers, skills and values. Thank you to all our speakers who've joined us today, sharing their experiences and taking time out to do that, and to our audience of law students and early career practitioners. I hope you found everything today to be engaging and enlightening, and will help you in your future plans. On behalf of BHRC, we look forward to welcoming you to all our future BHRC events. You can find details on our website, and do look out for our event reports on that website as well, which will be out in due course. It'll probably be a couple of months or so, but it will be out. So thank you all very much indeed. Thank you both. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.